Good afternoon, scaredy cats. Hope you enjoyed the video today and please like, comment, and subscribe.
The scorching sun beat down on the blacktop, creating a mirage that wavered in the distance. The highway was deserted except for two cars, one tailgating the other. The driver in the rear car was a middle-aged man, his face twisted in anger. He had been stuck behind the slow-moving car for miles, and he was running out of patience. The driver in the front car was a young woman, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. She could feel the man's rage building behind her, and it made her nervous. She tried to speed up, but there was nowhere to go. The road was long and straight, with no turnoffs in sight. The man honked his horn and flashed his lights, trying to intimidate her into moving faster. The woman glanced in her rearview mirror and saw the man's red face, his eyes bulging with fury. She knew she was in trouble. The man pulled up alongside her car, rolled down his window, and started yelling. His words were lost in the rush of wind, but she could see the veins bulging in his neck. She tried to ignore him, but he was relentless. He swerved his car in front of hers, forcing her to brake sharply. The woman's heart raced as she watched the man get out of his car. He was tall and muscular, with a shaved head and a bushy beard. He walked towards her car, his fists clenched at his sides. She locked her doors, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he broke through. The man pounded on her window, yelling obscenities. She could smell his breath through the glass, a foul mixture of alcohol and cigarettes. She tried to back up, but her car was trapped. Suddenly, the man stopped yelling and looked up. His face twisted in confusion as he saw a figure standing in the distance. It was a woman, dressed in a long white dress, with her hair blowing in the wind. She beckoned to him, and he hesitated. The woman in the car saw her chance and hit the gas. She swerved around the man's car, narrowly avoiding him, and sped off into the distance. She looked in her rearview mirror and saw the man standing in the middle of the road, staring at the figure in white. The woman breathed a sigh of relief as she drove away. She had escaped with her life, but she knew that she would never forget the terror of that moment. She had encountered the worst kind of road rage, and it had almost cost her everything. As she drove, she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Who was the woman in white, and why had she appeared at that moment? The woman felt a shiver run down her spine as she remembered the strange expression on the man's face. It was almost as if he had seen a ghost. The woman drove for miles, her mind racing with questions. She wondered if she would ever feel safe on the road again. But as she reached her destination, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, she saw the figure in white. She was standing on the side of the road, beckoning to her once again. The woman knew that she had to keep driving, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. As the woman drove, she began to see more and more figures in white. They lined the side of the road, their eyes fixed on her car. The woman tried to ignore them, but they seemed to be growing closer. Suddenly, the woman's car began to shake. She looked in her rearview mirror and saw the figures in white had surrounded her car. They were pounding on the windows and trying to open the doors. The woman tried to drive faster, but her car was stuck. She could feel their cold breath on her neck, and she knew she was in trouble. The figures began to pull her out of the car, their grip cold and unforgiving. She screamed and fought back, but it was no use. They were too strong. They dragged her out of the car and into the darkness. The woman's screams echoed through the night as she was dragged deeper and deeper into the woods. She could see the figures in white surrounding her, their faces twisted in anger. She knew that they were not human, but she could not understand what they were. As they reached a clearing in the woods, the figures began to chant in a language she did not understand. She could feel their grip tightening on her, their strength overwhelming. The woman knew that this was it. She was going to die. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of light. The figures in white screamed and recoiled, their grip loosening. The woman looked up and saw a figure in black standing in front of her, holding a torch. The figure was tall and imposing, with a black hood covering his face. He was holding a sword in one hand and a torch in the other. The woman watched as he began to fight off the figures in white, his movements graceful and precise. The woman tried to run, but her legs would not move. She was frozen in place, watching as the figure in black fought off the figures in white. She could see that he was outnumbered, but he fought on with a fierce determination. As the battle raged on, the woman realized that the figure in black was not alone. There were others, dressed in black, fighting alongside him. They were like a well-oiled machine, moving in perfect harmony. The battle lasted for what felt like hours, but eventually, the figures in white began to retreat. The woman watched as they vanished into the darkness, their screams fading into the night. She was alone with the figure in black. The figure turned to her, and the woman could see that he was smiling. He removed his hood, revealing a handsome face and piercing blue eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. The woman nodded, still in shock. The figure extended a hand, and the woman took it. He pulled her to her feet, and she could feel the warmth of his touch. "What are you?" she asked. The figure smiled again. "We're the protectors," he said. "We're here to fight off the evil that lurks in the darkness." The woman looked around her, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. "But why did they come after me?" she asked. The figure in black shrugged. "Maybe it was just bad luck," he said. "Or maybe they saw something in you that they wanted." The woman nodded, still trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. She knew that she would never forget this night, or the figure in black who had saved her life. As she drove home, she couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden in the darkness. But she knew that she had nothing to fear as long as there were protectors like the figure in black out there, fighting to keep the world safe. Sarah had always been a careful driver. She always obeyed the speed limit, signaled her turns, and kept a safe distance from other cars on the road. But today was different. She was running late for an important meeting and decided to take a shortcut through an unfamiliar part of town. As she approached an intersection, she noticed a driver in a red sports car speeding up behind her. He was driving recklessly, weaving in and out of lanes, and cutting off other drivers. Sarah felt a pang of anxiety as she watched the red car pull up beside her. The driver, a young man with a wild look in his eyes, leaned out his window and began shouting at her. Sarah couldn't make out what he was saying, but she could tell that he was angry. She tried to ignore him and turned onto a side street, hoping to lose him. But the red car followed her, honking and swerving dangerously. As Sarah approached a stop sign, she saw the red car pull up behind her. She tried to drive away, but the other driver rammed his car into hers, causing her to spin out of control and crash into a nearby ditch. Sarah was shaken but managed to climb out of her car and assess the damage. She could see the other driver getting out of his car, a crazed look on his face. He began to approach her, his fists clenched and his eyes filled with rage. Sarah knew that she was in danger. She tried to run away, but the other driver was too fast. He caught up to her, grabbed her by the arm, and dragged her into his car. For the next few hours, Sarah was held captive by the other driver, who took her on a terrifying journey through the city. He drove recklessly, putting their lives in danger at every turn. He screamed at her, threatened her, and made it clear that he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. Sarah felt helpless and alone. She knew that she had to find a way to escape before it was too late. As they drove down a dark, deserted road, Sarah noticed an opportunity to make a break for it. The other driver was momentarily distracted, giving her a chance to open the car door and jump out. Sarah hit the pavement hard, scraping her knees and elbows. She could hear the other driver shouting and cursing behind her as she ran as fast as she could. She didn't stop until she reached a gas station, where she collapsed in tears, her body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The police were called, and Sarah was able to identify her attacker. He was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. For Sarah, the horror of that day would stay with her forever. She was haunted by the memory of the other driver's rage and the terror of being held captive. But she was also grateful to be alive, and determined to use her experience to raise awareness about the dangers of road rage and the importance of safe driving. As she looked back on that day, Sarah knew that she had narrowly escaped a nightmare, and that she would always be vigilant and cautious whenever she was on the road. Despite her best efforts, Sarah couldn't shake off the trauma of her experience. She found herself jumping at sudden movements, avoiding crowded streets, and feeling a constant sense of fear and unease. She began to suffer from panic attacks and nightmares, reliving the moment when she was dragged into the other driver's car over and over again. Sarah tried to seek help from therapists and support groups, but nothing seemed to alleviate her anxiety. She became increasingly isolated, avoiding social situations and spending most of her time at home. It wasn't until Sarah met a fellow survivor of a traumatic event that things began to change. The two women bonded over their shared experiences and began to support each other through their healing process. With the help of her friend, Sarah started to confront her fears and gradually regained her sense of confidence and control. She returned to work, started driving again, and even went on a few dates. But the road rage incident had left its mark on her, and Sarah was never quite able to fully let go of the memory. She remained vigilant and cautious, always aware of the dangers that lurked on the road. Years went by, and Sarah settled into a new normal. She had learned to live with her anxiety, and had found ways to cope with the lingering effects of the trauma. But one day, while driving on the highway, Sarah saw a red sports car in her rearview mirror. She felt a jolt of panic as she remembered the other driver, and began to hyperventilate. Suddenly, the red sports car pulled up beside her, and Sarah could see the driver looking at her with a wild, angry expression. She could hear him shouting, but couldn't make out the words. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt a surge of adrenaline as she remembered the terror of being dragged into the other driver's car. But this time, Sarah was different. She had faced her fears, and had found the strength to move forward. She took a deep breath, and focused on her breathing. The other driver continued to shout and honk, but Sarah didn't react. She kept her eyes on the road, and continued driving at a safe and steady pace. As the red sports car faded into the distance, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had faced her greatest fear and had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. Sarah knew that the memory of that day would always stay with her, but she had learned to live with it. She had learned that even in the face of horror and trauma, there was always a way to move forward, and to find hope and healing. And as she drove on, Sarah felt a sense of peace and gratitude wash over her, knowing that she had overcome one of the greatest challenges of her life.